Dr. Tour, thank you very much for being here, sir. And this is really exciting for me to have you. And please let me first introduce you. So to the audience, first, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. And today we have a very special guest on Finding Truth, the renowned Dr. James Tour, who is not only a scientist, but also a believer. So and he always starts his sessions with mentioning that, which is really spectacular in today's world. So welcome, Dr. Tour, to this interview, and really thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Ahmed. It's really my pleasure. I've always had a warm welcome from friends when I've gone to the Middle East, and it's interesting in so many ways. It's freeing because I'm able to talk both about science and my love for God with Muslims much more than I can with people in the West. So when I go to the Middle East, it's in many ways it's refreshing for me because people are far more open to speaking about God.
Yeah, it's a blessing that there is some parts of the world where you can still do that, isn't it?
Yeah, so, we have the freedom to do it. It's just that when you do it in the West, sometimes people think you're crazy.
Yeah. Oh, no. So first I have to introduce you, and I have... it's a difficult task because really your CV is huge. So I'll just give a glimpse about it. For those who don't know Dr. James Tour already, Jim, you're a renowned synthetic chemist. You've been named the Scientist of the Year by the R&D magazine in 2013. You have been ranked as one of the top 10 chemists in the world over the past decade by Thomson Reuters. And I was personally fascinated when you went public with your scientific criticism to origins of life research and the media ramp up of the real status quo of what we know about origins of life. For those who don't know, Dr. Tour has recently given a full course about abiogenesis on his channel. And his channel is Dr. James Tour. That is Dr. James Tour, YouTube/C/Dr. James Tour. For those who are interested to look at the course, I have actually watched every minute of it, sometimes more than once. And it's like 13 episodes, and I guess there's one of them has 2 parts or something. And Dr. Tour is TT and WF Chow, professor of chemistry, professor of computer science also, which makes him very close to my heart because I studied electronics engineering and communications and computer science and control. He's also a professor of material sciences and nanoengineering, so quite a mix, in Rice University, in the Smalley Pearl Institute, and the Nanocarbon Center. And of course, his work with graphene is cutting edge. Something about his career. So Dr. Tour is primarily focused on carbon materials, chemistry, and nanotechnology. He has over 700 research publications. And since my family is in the research field, I know what 700 research publications means. So way to go, Dr. Tour, of that. And 140 patent families. The last number I had was 130, and then he updated me. It's 140 now. So it's very clear he's really doing more every day. And his H index is 156, which is a big deal. And his citations, which is the number of times other researchers refer to his work, to his literature, is over 110,000. And this is a very big number. In terms of awards, he became a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry in 2020, was awarded the Royal Society of Chemistry's Centenary Prize for Innovations in Materials Chemistry with applications in medicine and nanotechnology. So Dr. Tour is helping us in both our health and creating those small nanobots that maybe someday would unclog an artery or something. And he was inducted into the National Academy of Inventors in 2015, named among the 50 most influential scientists in the world today by the bestschools.org in 2014, named Scientist of the Year by the R&D magazine in 2013, won the ACS Nano Lectureship Award from the American Chemical Society in 2012. He was ranked one of the top 10 chemists that we already said by Thomson Reuters in 2009, and in the same year was also made a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And the CV goes on, so I'm going to stop here. Maybe I'm going to refer to his work on nanocars later when we start asking him about molecular machines. But Dr. Tour, being wary of not finishing all our 90 minutes into your CV, this is one great CV. So congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
So our discussion with Dr. Tour today will have will be around abiogenesis and some aspects of evolution that relate to chemistry. And so let's first start by this. What drew my attention to this field specifically is that, Jim, the more I look into the mainstream, there is always this proposition that unguided chance events that are random can produce everything around us. And this, spans from how the cosmos was originated, random fluctuations and stuff, how genetic material came into being, primordial cells, how those cells then evolved into creatures, how we have humans, how we have conscious beings and awareness and intelligence. Everything, when there is no explanation, it's chance. As a scientist who really goes into the lab and invents things and puts plenty of definite thought and work into that, is this a rational scientific position, according to your experience as a scientist and even an inventor?
No, it doesn't make any sense to me, really. I can't fathom this. We put so much work and so much detailed thought into trying to carry out even the simplest of chemical reactions, the new reactions that we do. To think that something like just even a living cell could have come about by a random process is just crazy hard. This is just silliness. And people will project this out and say, well, it got to a certain stage and evolution took over. And just by saying that, there's this homage that they think has to be paid. Oh, evolution took over, and then we can take care of all of this. No, we can't just throw this at the doorstep of evolution and say evolution took care of this. And so this is an irrational approach, and I even see this in graduate students. You ask them, well, how did that happen? And they say evolutionarily. Well, because they've said evolutionarily, the audience now has to sit in quietness. Oh, okay, so evolution did it, now we understand. No, I don't understand any of that, nor does anybody else. But because they use that word, we're supposed to somehow bow down and just accept it. And as soon as you ask for details, okay, take me through the process of how evolution would do that. Let's take it one step at a time. And then they get angry, everything starts to wither around the edges, and you see that nobody really understands this. So just because we throw out that term that has become a sacrosanct term that you should not ever oppose it is a real problem, because it does an injustice also to our students to think that you can just throw out that word and now nobody can touch you. So we try to explain things, and this is not some holy word that's untouchable.
And actually, two things that you just said caught my attention. So the first one is being angry, which is something I experience every day, because due to the videos that I put out on my channel, I go into those conversations every day, tens of them. And the second thing is, do you see this in other fields of science? That this one word that is a banner would be given as an explanation for such multitude of things, and we have to accept it. So number one, what is your explanation for the anger? And do we see this in any other fields of science, other real empirical fields of science?
Well, I mean, scientists are like anybody else, but I don't know that there are fields of science where you see such anger as you do in this saying this word evolution and trying to not embrace it. We're seeing more of that around issues that are scientific and pseudoscientific, and things can move more toward the political, and then it gets like that very rapidly. But I think that's often normal human behavior, that if you don't have an answer, that you can react back with anger in a way to quench the argument and to stop it. And I think that's normal behavior, and scientists are just normal. I mean, we have our own fears. We want to allay our fears. We care about our reputation. We care about things that we've said and our work, and we don't like when people start publishing papers that contradict our work. I mean, it keeps us up at night. I mean, we're just like everybody else. So this is normal human behavior, I suppose.
So the takeaway from that is that scientists are not gods, are they?
No, they're not gods. And when we don't have answers, we often get angry. And you see this sort of thing also in religious arguments. When people stop having answers, they'll start getting angry, and they'll start shouting and pounding their fist on the table, as if that somehow has given them now authority to not have to answer certain questions. So when you don't have answers to questions, you have a tendency to react back with anger. If you know it very easily, you just answer it. Yeah,
that's what a reasonable person will do. So let's go to our second one. It's our opening question about life. And to me and to many others, life is an enigma to material science. I've never seen a clear explanation of what is life other than its material features. But whenever you go in a discussion, somebody will say it's just chemistry. So you're the chemist, and a renowned one. What is your reaction when people say life is chemistry?
This is bumping up against philosophy, and it's a hard question. So, for example, you could take a wonderful person, say Mother Teresa, who spent her life in India serving the poor, who had they take this oath of chastity, of poverty, and of service to the poor for the rest of their life. I mean, that's an amazing oath, that you're going to remain chastity, you're going to remain unmarried, you're going to remain in poverty, you're never going to seek money, and you're going to devote your life to serving the poor. So here is this great woman who did that. Now you could take a woman like that and you could give her 1 milligram. 1 milligram is like the size of a grain of salt. And you could give her 1 milligram of material, and that could affect her brain enough to make her into a mass killer, a mass murderer. So there's certainly something chemical going on there. So there's chemistry that happens that affects our brains, that affects our actions. On the other side of it, there's things that are very hard to chemically understand. It doesn't mean that because we don't understand it today, we will never understand it. It just means that today we don't understand it. So for example, my granddaughter is visiting. I haven't seen her in almost 2 years, my two granddaughters. I mean, the younger one, she just stays by my side. She will sleep next to me. Wants me to hold her hand when she goes to sleep. I mean, she's right there. My love for her is so great. How do I explain that with science? How do I explain that with chemistry? I would sacrifice my life 100 times for her if I could. How do I explain it? How do I explain that when I'm working on all of these things and all of this great research and all of these great ideas, that 60% of my CPU is thinking about that girl? Why is that? What is it that makes me want to be with her and embrace her? These things are hard to understand. There is no doubt that within life, chemistry is exploited for the purposes of life. But is there something that goes beyond that? And certainly the materialist says, no, it's just the chemistry that goes on here. And there are other things, even within science, which gives hints that it extrapolates beyond the materialistic world. And I'm sorry for moving this conversation, but you see this, for example, in NDE, near-death experiences, where their heart has stopped, and they are functionally dead for minutes, 5 minutes or something. And then they come back and they describe to you things that scientifically are very hard to understand, where they describe to you that they raised up out of their bodies and they saw things that were on the tops of high counters, high cabinets in the hospital room. And then they saw things on the roof of the building that they could never know were there. And then they go and they see these actual very features on the roof of the building. So there are things that happen even within science when you start probing these people as scientists that science is unable to understand with the materialistic world, and it has to start touching on the metaphysical. So even within science, we bump up against the metaphysical when it comes to talking about issues of life. So that's about as deep as I can go, Ahmed.
So is it fair that it is to say that it is unfair to life to just reduce it to chemistry with such a blunt statement?
It's certainly unfair in the respect that there's so much of the chemistry, even of the chemistry of life, that we don't understand, that we have no way today of explaining. Again, we might be able to explain this in 100 years or 200 years or 500 years from now. Just like if you asked a man in the 1700s, why is it that when the parents are tall, the child is tall? When the parents are short, the child is short. And they may say, well, this is God. Well, okay, well, this is God, but scientifically, how does this happen? They wouldn't know. Well, now we know that the genetic code is inscribed in the DNA, and the features, the enzymes action that's going to build the certain features is encoded from that master plan that's inherited from our parents. So we understand more today than we did 300 years ago about how this thing happened. So over time, we may not be able to understand it. It's unfair to say, well, this is just chemistry, because there's a lot of chemistry we don't understand. And it's unfair to say this is just chemistry because there are features that science does not explain for us, like the love of a man for his grandchild, or the love between a husband and their spouse, of the emptiness that's felt when one spouse dies after they've been married for 50 years, the emptiness that comes. How do you explain this chemically? Maybe there is a chemical explanation, but it's not fair to just say, well, that's just chemistry, any more than it's fair to say in this day and age, well, that's just, that's just inherited. Well, give me more details, or any more than it's fair to say, well, that's just evolution. Evolution does that. That's not fair. Tell me more. Give me more specificity.
Great. So it takes us to our next question. Because while you're a chemist, in your final episode of your Origins of Life course, you posted what seemed to be a challenge. I think you called it a challenge. And it was about creating a living cell from scratch. And you even extended it more and you said, we'll give you the material. Whatever material you want, we'll give it to you. So it's as if you take care of the chemistry and then show us how from that you can create something. In my religion, for example, in Islam, there is a challenge that looks similar to that, where God challenges people who don't believe to create a fly. He says, bring everybody on the face of earth and create a fly. So let me ask you, what is the significance? Why did you choose to make that the closing thing, the closing challenge of your course?
Well, it's interesting with your Islamic challenge because, you know, a fly is probably the smallest entity that the people could fathom in that day.
Yeah.
But a fly is exceedingly complex compared to a single cell.
Yeah.
And now 1,500 years later, we can't even make a cell, let alone a fly. I mean, the complexity in a fly is just fascinating, Even I have sat and I allow mosquitoes just to sting me, just for the joy of watching them. Because you watch this little mosquito flying, and there's this amazing coordination of flight. And their head is like the size of a pinhead. And tiny little brain, it has all this coordination, and it's able to detect that I'm viable for food. And after it stings, it draws the blood. Then immediately it emits something, another chemical that calls other mosquitoes and says, here's fresh food. You know,
He's a prey.
They call them. This is extraordinary scientifically. How do you do this? A fly is so hard to kill a fly. I mean, how do they react so quickly to be able to jump and then start flying so rapidly? So even
about the mosquito, we have another verse in the Quran that says, the translation of meaning is, Allah is not embarrassed to give an example or a parable with a mosquito and what is higher than it. So the ones who believe, they will know it is the truth from their Lord, but those who don't will say, what is this example? And it's amazing listening to you give the example of the mosquito. It's just amazing. Yeah, and you as a believer see what is the great wisdom behind it, and others would say, maybe it's chemistry or it's evolution or something.
Yeah, it's so hard to fathom these things. So just creating a single cell. So the challenge was, okay, you have to first make the building blocks of the building blocks. You have to first make the sugars. You have to first make the amino acids and the nucleotides and the lipids. So you have to first do this. And then I say, well, I know that's too hard because we don't know how to do this in a chiral fashion, and we don't know how to. But okay, I'll give that to you. Now you have to take them and polymerize them. Well, polymerizing them is very hard to do that. Polymerizing sugars is very hard, and it's not easy to do this. And so I say, okay, well, you can't make the sugars. And then how do you polymerize RNA and prevent the 2,5 linkage and only get the 3,5 linkage? Very hard to do that. How do you do that? Even if it's DNA, so it's deoxyribose, you still have to do the activation step in order to get these things polymerized. Without activation, it's very hard to get these sorts of structures, so they have to be activated. The chemistry is exceedingly involved. So I say, yeah, okay, I understand. It's hard to make the polymers. So I'll give you the polymers. Now you have to make the cell. So I'll give you the polymeric structures. Well, you have to have the polymers in the right order because the information is encoded in the sequence of the DNA and the RNA. You say, okay, we don't know how that happens. So I'll give you the sequence. You name the sequence, I'll give it to you, just like you want. Now, if I gave you all those components, could you make a cell? And you don't have to do this in a cave someplace or in the bottom of the ocean. You do this in your pristine laboratory with all the reagents you want, all the literature you want. Can you do it? And the answer is no. The answer is no. And so nobody has picked up this challenge and say, yeah, I'm going to do this, because we can't do it. So I took the simplest living system that you can have is a cell. And that is the simplest construct we have. In fact, that's how we define life. It has to be made of cells. That's not my definition. That's long been the biologist's definition. And it has to have homeostasis. It has to be able to have this metabolic functions. It has to be able to breathe. It has to be able to reproduce and have its offspring. And so it has to have all of these features to have life. And I went through and I showed all the different functions you have to have, because biophysicists have reduced, theoretically, you can say, what are the functions you have to have for life? What are the functions you have to have? And you have to have so many different pieces that you have to have at least 200 protein coding genes. And even with that, you'd have to have all the exogenous amino acids coming in. Where do you get this? I mean, it's so hard to fathom. So no, nobody would pick up that challenge, because as of today, it can't be done. Now, again, I can't say that it will never be done. I don't know where we will be in 500 or 1,000 years from now. All I know is that it can't be done today, and it is harder. It is going to be harder to think about how to do it next year than it is this year, because the target's moving further away.
Actually, this is my exact next question.
Okay.
So it is, what do you mean when you say that the more time passes, the matter of creating life becomes more difficult?
Right.
So, I mean, aren't there enough complexity that we have already discovered? Do you expect that there is much more complexity that we don't even know about, to the extent that we're just at the crust of this?
Yeah, I mean, what happens is, the more we learn about a cell, the harder it gets to think about making one. So 100 years ago, a cell was just a bunch of protoplasm in this cell. Well, now we know a cell is a factory. There's so much going on in there. And every year we learn more about the complexity of a cell. And each of these features that we're going to talk about today, I mean, it's hugely complex. So we will know more about the complexity of a cell 5 years from now than we know today. There are many things that we know about a cell now that we didn't know 5 years ago. That's the beautiful thing about research. You turn over one stone and you find 5 other mysteries. And so what happens is, the target, the challenge to make a cell, is here. And now in 5 years from now, it's out here. So the target gets further and further away. So we say the goalposts have been moved. So you know, in Egypt, you play a lot of soccer, and you know, say you move the goalposts another 100 meters away, and it becomes harder to score a goal. And so you keep moving the goalpost further away faster than you're approaching it. So the goalpost is moving away faster than you're approaching it. That means that the target becomes harder. So actually, the target is further away each year, because we go, whoa, I didn't know a cell was that complex. So long before we ever get to your challenge of a fly, we've got to make a single cell. And we have no idea how that's done. And then building the whole system of a fly, I mean, forget it.
In one discussion I was having with an evolutionary biologist, I just had it, so I said, okay, create a fly. And it was also with a science explainer, and I got this peculiar answer that I'll take your opinion about it before we go to abiogenesis. He said, well, nobody is picking the challenge of creating a fly because nobody cares to create a fly. And it just shocked me, because I know that there are so many scientists and engineers working on trying to create bots like flies and mosquitoes. Is this the case, or I'm imagining it?
Well, if you could create a living cell, you'd win a Nobel Prize. So why somebody would say nobody cares about that? Just to make one cell, you'd win a Nobel Prize. I mean, like immediately. I mean, this is so big of a discovery. Now, to be able to make something as complex as a fly is just so unfathomably hard. What scientists do is they just think about this, and you have to understand. We make drones, and you can make little drones, and they can fly around. Well, what is that drone made out of? Made out of plastic. It's made out of composite. It's made out of silicon. Little patterned wires. Why don't you build that drone out of molecules? Why don't you build it out of peptides and nucleotides? Why don't you do that? Because we have ubiquitous, all around us, we have the model of flies. And so we should copy that, because that's what people do. They see something and it's easiest just to copy what you have. So build Absolutely. It out of the very things that the fly is made out of. Nobody does that. Nobody does that because it's so unfathomably hard. What's been put before us in nature is the hard way to do it. God's put before us the hard way. We take the easy way by using all these composites and things, which in itself is not easy. I'm talking about hundreds of years of development to develop all the materials to be able to do this, and the techniques to do this, and the clean rooms and the silicon processing to make these little drones. Well, why don't we make it like a fly? Because those have far more maneuverability. Those run on far less energy. And those are able to acquire their energy on the fly, we could say, as they're doing things. And,
That's a good one.
And so why do we do this? Because we are so without knowledge on how to do this out of the raw chemicals that are there in nature. We don't know how to do it. So we try to mimic it with something else. So I don't know why anybody would say that, but I disagree with your friend that nobody cares to make a fly. Oh boy, that'd be just, I mean, you'd be so famous. You'd be so famous. You'd be on every talk show, everything, if you could do that. And you'd be very wealthy too.